The lock blinked red at 8:47 a.m., and Rhea Mercer, CEO of Lumagrid, the woman who had restructured a failing energy company at 32 and never once flinched in a boardroom, was locked out of her own rental house in a white dress covered in bougainvillea petals. 13 minutes. That was all she had before the shareholder call that would decide whether she kept the company her mother built or watched it get carved up by men who never believed she deserved it in the first place. Her phone 4%, her assistant not answering, the smart lock panel blinking red like it enjoyed the chaos. "Hey, beautiful." The voice came from over the cedar fence. "You negotiating with that gate, or do you need someone to actually save you?" Her neighbor stood in his garden basket of cherry tomatoes in one arm, dark soil on his hands, the kind of unhurried smile that belonged to a man who had never once tried to impress anyone. Rhea had sworn off warmth the same way she'd sworn off weakness. She had built walls the same way other people built careers, carefully, deliberately, one cold decision at a time. She didn't know it yet, but the man holding that glass of mint lemonade across the fence was about to make every single one of those walls feel very, very temporary. If stories about love that sneaks up on you when you least expect it are your kind of thing, subscribe to our channel and hit the bell. There's a lot more where this came from. Rhea Mercer had not taken a vacation in 4 years. What she had done was relocate her office to different zip codes when the pressure in the city got loud enough to affect her sleep. This summer, that meant a rented villa on Sunmere Lane, a quiet residential stretch 30 minutes outside the city, lined with old oak trees and the kind of neighborhood where people still waved at each other from their driveways. The house itself was everything she required: high ceilings, floor-to-ceiling glass, cream-colored furniture, and absolute silence. No clutter, no noise, no complications. She had moved in on a Sunday and had a full work schedule loaded by Sunday night. Lumagrid was her life's architecture. Her mother, Claire Mercer, had founded it 15 years ago with a single conviction that clean energy shouldn't be a luxury. The company developed affordable solar grid systems for low-income coastal communities, the kind of neighborhoods that got hit hardest by power outages and paid the most for the least reliable service. When Claire died 3 years ago, Rhea had turned down 2 acquisition offers and taken the helm herself. Not because she was sentimental, because she understood exactly what would happen to her mother's work the moment someone with different priorities got their hands on it. She had been right to worry. Brennan Vale, Lumagrid's CFO, had spent the last 18 months quietly repositioning the company. New investor relationships, revised projections, language in board documents that shifted the company's focus away from community infrastructure and toward premium commercial contracts. Every change was small enough to explain away individually. Together they added up to something Rhea had only recently begun to understand the full shape of. The shareholder meeting this Tuesday was supposed to be her moment to push back. Next door, separated from Rhea's villa by a low cedar fence and approximately 1 universe of difference, lived Kellen Brooks. He was 38, a landscape designer and irrigation specialist who had built a quiet but steady business fitting smart watering systems for residential gardens across the county. He lived in a house half the size of Rhea's, with a front porch that needed repainting and a backyard that looked like a children's book illustration. Cherry tomatoes, mint, sunflowers, strawberry runners, climbing beans on a timber trellis, and a long wooden table that always had a picture of something cold on it. He lived there with his daughter Maisie, 8 years old, and entirely convinced that she was the most important person in any room she entered, a quality Kellen found both exhausting and quietly magnificent. Kellen had been a single father since Maisie was 3. He didn't talk about it much. What people noticed instead was that he laughed easily, fixed things patiently, and had never once been seen in a hurry. He and Rhea were, by any reasonable measure, not each other's kind of person, which was exactly what made everything that followed so unavoidable. The morning started precisely the way Rhea had planned it. She was up at 6, coffee made, presentation, reviewed notes, annotated in the margins in red ink. By 8:30, she had changed into a white wrap dress, pulled her hair back and was carrying her laptop to the garden terrace to take the call outside. A small concession to the summer air that she had allowed herself after 3 days of working in air-conditioned silence. She stepped outside, pulled the terrace door shut behind her, and heard it lock. The click was automatic. The realization came half a second later when she turned back and the handle didn't move. She tried the front gate. Locked. The side panel blinked red when she entered her code. She tried again. Red. She picked up her phone to call building management and watched the screen drop to 4%. Her portable charger was on the kitchen counter, visible through the glass wall, entirely out of reach. She called her assistant Dana. No answer. She called the property management company. She was placed on hold. She called Dana again. Rhea stood on the sun-warmed brick path laptop under one arm, bougainvillea petals drifting down from the climbing vine above the gate and landing on her white dress with the calm indifference of a universe that did not care about shareholder meetings. 8 minutes left. "Hey, beautiful." The voice came from over the cedar fence. "You negotiating with that gate, or do you need someone to actually save you?" Kellen Brooks was standing in his garden with a basket of cherry tomatoes and an expression that sat somewhere between concern and amusement. Maisie was visible behind him, crouched near the strawberry runners, and watching the situation with the focused attention of someone expecting entertainment. "I don't need saving," Rhea said. "I need this gate to understand its place." Kellen set his basket down and came to the fence. He'd been meaning to patch the irrigation line running between the two properties, a legacy connection from years back when the previous owners had shared infrastructure. And he'd noticed this morning that the villa's network node was still live on the shared conduit. He hadn't thought much of it then. He crouched now and looked at the control panel without touching it. "This system hasn't malfunctioned," he said, quieter now. "Excuse me, that error code," he pointed to the blinking panel. "That's not a dead battery or a software freeze. That's a remote override. Someone locked you out from outside the local network." Rhea stared at him. "How do you know what that code means?" "Because I install smart irrigation systems that run on the same firmware as these locks. I've seen that specific error exactly once before, when a client's system got accessed by someone who wasn't supposed to have credentials." He looked at her steadily. "Someone did this on purpose, and they timed it for this morning." Her phone died. Kellen reached over the fence and held out a glass of mint lemonade that Maisie had appeared with silently and without being asked, as if this were a normal part of their morning routine. "Come through the garden," he said. "I have a separate network connection. You can take your call from my greenhouse." Rhea looked at the glass. She looked at the locked gate. She looked at the 7 minutes she had left. "I am not running a shareholder meeting from a greenhouse," she said. "No," Kellen agreed. "You're running it from a greenhouse with very good tomatoes." The greenhouse was smaller than Rhea's walk-in closet. It had a timber-framed glass roof, 2 long wooden benches lined with seedling trays, a shelf of terracotta pots, a chalkboard on the wall where someone had written "Thursday basil transplant, Friday check the beans," in uneven handwriting that was clearly Maisie's. A single folding table sat near the far window where a laptop stand and a small wireless router had been set up for what Kellen explained was a weekly gardening class he ran for neighborhood kids during summer break. Rhea sat down, connected to the network, and opened her presentation with 4 minutes to spare. She did not thank him. She told herself it was because there wasn't time. The call lasted 45 minutes. Rhea held it together the way she always did, precise, composed, impossible to rattle. She answered every question, redirected every challenge, and gave nothing away. When it ended, she closed the laptop and sat for a moment in the warm, plant-scented air, listening to the sound of bees moving through the garden outside. Then she opened her email and found the anonymous message that had been sitting in her inbox since 7:15 that morning unread, because she had been too focused on her preparation to notice it. "Brennan Vale has been building a case for your removal for 6 weeks. The lockout this morning will be presented to the board as evidence of instability, your inability to manage basic operational security. He already has 3 board members. He needs 1 more. The meeting today was not the target. The next one is." Rhea read it twice. Then she walked out of the greenhouse and found Kellen at the garden table, splitting a cherry tomato in half and feeding one piece to Maisie, who accepted it without looking up from the book in her lap. "You need to stop using every device connected to that villa's network," Kellen said without looking up either. "If someone had remote access to your lock system, they potentially have visibility across everything running on the same router. Your laptop, your calls, your files." Rhea sat down across from him. It was the first time she had sat at an outdoor table in longer than she could remember. The sun was warm. The lemonade was still cold. "Dana didn't answer this morning," she said slowly. "She never misses a call before a major meeting. Your assistant. She's been with me for 2 years." Rhea paused. "She's the only person besides me who has access to my calendar and internal presentation files." Kellen said nothing. He didn't need to. Rhea looked at the cedar fence between their two properties, at the locked gate, still blinking red on the other side, at the greenhouse she had just run a shareholder meeting from, between trays of basil seedlings. Everything she had built her professional life around: control systems, trusted structures, had just failed her at the same moment in the same morning, with the same precision that suggested it was not a coincidence. She had one option left, and it was sitting across from her cutting tomatoes. "Tell me what you need to help me find out what Brennan Vale is actually doing," she said. Kellen looked at her for a moment. Then he pushed the bowl of tomatoes across the table. "Start by eating something. You've been running on coffee and adrenaline since 6 a.m. and it shows." By the third day, Rhea had a system. She arrived at the greenhouse at 8, set up her laptop on the folding table, and worked until noon. Kellen left her alone during those hours, appearing only once mid-morning to refill the water pitcher and occasionally to move a seedling tray that was blocking the best light. He did not hover. He did not ask questions. He treated her presence in his greenhouse the way he treated most things, as a natural and unremarkable development that simply needed to be accommodated. Rhea told herself this was a temporary arrangement, a logistical solution, nothing more. The greenhouse in the mornings had a quality of light she had never encountered in an office. It came through the glass roof in long, warm columns that shifted slowly across the wooden bench as the hours passed. Landing on her laptop screen on the small ceramic bowl of cherry tomatoes Kellen always left at the corner of her table on the leaves of the seedlings around her. The air smelled like mint and damp soil and something faintly sweet that she eventually identified as the strawberry runners climbing the south wall. It was, she reluctantly admitted to herself, not an unpleasant place to work. What she had not accounted for was Maisie. The 8-year-old treated the greenhouse as a thoroughfare passing through at irregular intervals with the confidence of someone who owned the property and was generously allowing others to use it. She asked questions the way other people breathed continuously and without apparent effort. "Miss Rhea, are you actually a CEO?" "Yes." "So you're like the boss of everything?" "Of the company, yes." Maisie considered this. "Could you make summer shorter? Because it's really hot and Dad says we can't run the sprinklers during peak hours anymore." Rhea opened her mouth, found she had no answer, and closed it again. From the garden outside, without looking up from the irrigation line he was repairing, "If she could do that, I'd sign the contract right now." It was the kind of exchange that should have been easy to ignore. Instead, Rhea found herself thinking about it 20 minutes later in the middle of reviewing a financial report which was not acceptable. She recalibrated. She was here to work. She was here because her villa's network had been compromised and she needed clean connectivity and a space Brennan's reach hadn't contaminated. She was not here to become part of whatever warm, chaotic, sun-drenched domestic situation existed on this side of the cedar fence. But the days kept happening anyway. Maisie drew a small sign in green marker and planted it in a terracotta pot at the corner of Rhea's table. "Miss Rhea's Work Corner. No frowning for more than 5 minutes." Rhea looked at it for a long time and did not remove it. Kellen brought lunch to the garden table every afternoon without announcing it. Sandwiches, cold pasta, once an inexplicably good tomato soup made from the garden's current surplus. He didn't ask her to join him. He simply set out 2 plates and she came, because not coming would have required an explanation she didn't have. Meanwhile, Brennan moved. Word reached Rhea through a contact on the board that Brennan had begun circulating a quiet narrative that Rhea was distracted, emotionally unstable, that she had retreated to a rented house in the suburbs and was spending her time with a man nobody in the company knew anything about. The framing was deliberate. The implication was clear. He was turning Kellen's garden, this ordinary, generous, sun-filled place, into evidence of her unraveling. Rhea read the message twice, then looked out through the greenhouse glass at Kellen showing Maisie how to stake a leaning sunflower without snapping the stem. He held the cane steady and let her do the tying, patient and unhurried guiding without taking over. For the first time in a long time, she felt something she didn't have a boardroom name for. It sat somewhere between rage and grief, and a fierce, unfamiliar protectiveness toward people who had done nothing except be kind to her. She closed the email and went back to work. But the feeling stayed. It was Kellen who found the thread. He had been helping Rhea map LumaGrid's internal data transfers, not because he was a corporate investigator, but because smart irrigation systems ran on the same kind of networked architecture as building management software. And he understood instinctively how data moved through connected systems and where it could be quietly redirected without triggering alerts. On the fourth evening, sitting at the garden table with 2 laptops open and the last of the daylight fading through the oak trees, he pulled up a pattern in LumaGrid's outbound file transfers that didn't match any approved vendor relationship in Rhea's records. "This project," he said, turning his screen toward her, "the Coastal Grid Initiative. When did it last have active internal traffic?" Rhea looked at the timestamps. "It shouldn't have any. That project is in a holding phase pending board approval for the next funding cycle. It has 17 outbound data transfers in the last 6 weeks, all routed through a third-party consulting address that doesn't appear anywhere in your vendor registry." The silence that followed was the kind that precedes something irreversible. Rhea pulled the project file. The Coastal Grid Initiative had been her mother's last and most ambitious undertaking, a plan to deliver subsidized solar infrastructure to 11 low-income coastal communities that currently paid some of the highest energy rates in the state. Claire Mercer had spent the final 2 years of her life building the framework. Rhea had protected it through 3 rounds of board pressure to monetize or abandon it. What she found in the file now made her hands go still. The project's core assets, the site assessments, the community partnership agreements, the proprietary grid specifications her mother had developed, had been packaged and transferred. The receiving entity was a shell address that, when Rhea traced it through 2 layers of registration, resolved to a competitor that had tried to acquire LumaGrid 18 months ago. Brennan had not just been building a case against her, he had been selling her mother's work to the company her mother had specifically refused to partner with because they had no interest in affordable community energy and every interest in owning the intellectual property and repackaging it for commercial clients at 10 times the price. Rhea stood up from the table. She walked to the far end of the garden and stood with her back to Kellen for a long moment, facing the sunflowers along the fence line. She had kept it together through the lockout, through Dana's betrayal, through Brennan's board maneuvering. She had kept it together the way she always did, by compressing everything into a manageable shape and dealing with it systematically. This she could not compress. Kellen came and stood beside her. He didn't say anything immediately. Then he pointed to one of the larger sunflowers near the fence post, the one that had been knocked sideways by a storm 2 days earlier and was growing at a 40-degree angle from its stake. "It's not broken," he said. "It's just finding its way back to the light." Rhea looked at the flower. She looked at it for longer than she intended to. "She built that project for people who couldn't fight for themselves," she said quietly. "She always said the company wasn't supposed to make us powerful, it was supposed to make things fair." "Then that's still worth fighting for," Kellen said. It was a simple thing to say. It landed with a weight that years of boardroom strategy had never managed to carry. Then Rhea heard his voice shift lower, turned slightly away, and realized he was on the phone. She caught fragments. "Local coverage. The story has real public interest. Yes, I can talk tomorrow." She went very still. Every warm thing she had allowed herself to feel over the past 4 days sealed itself shut in a single second. She knew this pattern. She had lived it once before with a man she had trusted completely and who had used her confidence to build his own reputation. She had sworn after that she would never be this careless again. She turned around. "Who was that?" she asked. Kellen lowered the phone. "A journalist I know. He covers—" "You called a journalist." Her voice was flat and precise. "While you have access to my files, my company's data, and 4 days of everything I've told you in confidence." "Rhea, I want to know what you told him." Kellen looked at her steadily. The warmth in his expression didn't disappear, it just became very quiet. "I told him nothing about you. I called him because Brennan's people have already started feeding the local press a version of this story, and I thought getting ahead of it without asking me." The silence stretched. "Rhea, I haven't sold anything. I wouldn't." "You wouldn't," she repeated as if testing the word for structural integrity and finding it insufficient. "I don't actually know that. I've known you for 4 days." Kellen was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was even and low. "Rhea, I haven't even managed to sell Maisie's tomato sauce at the neighborhood market. You really think I'm out here brokering CEO secrets?" It was the right thing to say. Under other circumstances, it might have worked. But the fear was already moving faster than the logic, and Rhea had never found a way to outrun that particular combination. She picked up her laptop from the garden table and walked back toward the cedar fence without another word. Rhea walked back into her villa and turned the air conditioning up until the rooms were cold enough to think clearly. She told herself she had made the right call. 4 days was not enough to trust anyone with the kind of information Kellen had been sitting next to. The journalist contact was a fact, not a suspicion. She had responded to a fact. That was not fear, that was professional judgment. She repeated this to herself at intervals throughout the evening and believed it less each time. The next morning, she drove to Lumagrid's city office, walked through the lobby in a cream-colored suit, and sat down at her desk for the first time in a week. Her assistant's chair was empty. Dana had submitted a resignation letter by email 2 days earlier, citing personal reasons. No notice, no explanation. The timing told Rhea everything the letter didn't. Dana would later be named in the investigation alongside Brennan, the resignation doing nothing to shield her from accountability. She worked through the afternoon without stopping. It felt familiar, and it felt hollow, and she did not examine the difference. By Thursday, Brennan moved into the open. He released a curated package to 3 media contacts, photographs of Rhea working at Kellen's garden table taken from a distance with a long lens. Screenshots of internal calendar changes Dana had made on Rhea's behalf, reframed to suggest Rhea had been delegating critical decisions to an outside party. A statement from an anonymous board-level source describing the CEO as increasingly disengaged and difficult to reach. The story ran on 2 local business outlets by Friday morning. The framing was surgical, not a direct attack, but a portrait of a leader losing her grip, retreating from responsibility, allowing personal entanglements to compromise her professional judgment. Rhea read both articles at her desk and felt something cold settle in her chest that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Then her phone rang. It was Kellen. She let it ring. An hour later, a text from a number she didn't recognize, Miss Rhea. "It's Maisie. I used Dad's phone. I took down the sign from your work corner. I didn't want it to cause more trouble. I hope you're okay. M." Rhea read the message 3 times. She thought about the sign green marker on white cardstock planted in a terracotta pot. No frowning for more than 5 minutes, and felt something crack open in the carefully sealed architecture of her chest. Maisie was 8 years old. She had offered Rhea a corner of her greenhouse and a handmade sign and tomatoes from her garden, and now she was quietly removing her welcome because she thought it had caused damage. Later that day, Rhea learned the full extent of the collateral. 3 of Kellen's landscaping clients had paused their contracts pending clarification of the media reports. The neighborhood summer gardening class, 12 kids twice a week free of charge, had seen 4 families withdraw their children following calls from other parents who had seen the articles. One of those parents had apparently told their child that Kellen had helped someone break into a company's private data. Maisie had heard this from a friend at the park. Rhea sat with that information for a long time. She had walked away from Kellen's garden because she was afraid of being used. In doing so, she had left him completely exposed to the person who was actually using both of them. She had protected herself with the precision of someone who had spent years perfecting that particular skill, and she had done it at the exact moment that someone else, someone who had given her nothing but space and lemonade and a folding table with good light, needed her to stay. The cold in her chest shifted into something that felt uncomfortably like the truth about herself. She picked up her phone. She did not call Kellen. Not yet. There was something she needed to do first, and she needed to do it alone, and she needed to do it before she lost her nerve. She opened the LumaGrid internal archive and started looking for her mother's original project files. Brennan requested a meeting on Friday afternoon. He booked it through the board secretary, which meant it was already on record before Rhea had a chance to decline. She arrived at the LumaGrid conference room at 4 o'clock to find him already seated, a manila folder in front of him, and the particular expression of a man who had spent weeks preparing for a conversation he expected to win. He slid the folder across the table without preamble. Inside was a draft agreement. Rhea's name at the top. A transition of executive authority effective in 30 days with a structured exit package and a non-disclosure clause covering all internal company matters for a period of 5 years. The board has 3 confirmed votes, Brennan said. I need 1 more to formalize the transition. I expect to have it by Monday. I'm giving you the opportunity to make this clean. Rhea looked at the document without touching it. You broke into my home network, had my assistant feed you confidential files, and manufactured a media narrative out of photographs taken with a telephoto lens. And you're calling this clean? Brennan's expression didn't shift. I'm calling it inevitable. You've spent a week working out of a neighbor's garden shed. The board doesn't need much convincing at this point. Greenhouse, Rhea said. I beg your pardon. It's a greenhouse, not a shed. Brennan let that pass. There's also the matter of your neighbor's involvement with company data. I have enough to file a complaint with the relevant authorities claiming unauthorized access. It won't hold up long term, but it will hold up long enough to do significant damage to his business and personal reputation. He paused. He has a daughter, I understand. The room was very quiet. Rhea looked at the document. She looked at Brennan. She understood precisely what was being offered and precisely what it would cost to refuse it. If she fought, Kellen got dragged through a legal process he had done nothing to deserve. His clients, already spooked by the media coverage, would dissolve entirely. The gardening class would end. Maisie would spend months watching her father's name get used as a weapon in a corporate dispute he had walked into simply by being a decent neighbor on a summer morning. If she signed, she lost the company. She lost the Coastal Grid Initiative. She lost the last concrete thing her mother had left in the world. There was no version of this that didn't cost something irreplaceable. That evening, Rhea drove to Sunmere Lane. The garden was golden in the late afternoon light. Sunflowers tilted toward the last warmth of the day. The wooden table set with nothing on it for the first time since she had arrived. Kellen was on the porch. He stood when he saw her at the fence. She had prepared what she intended to say. She delivered it the only way she knew how, evenly, without flinching, looking directly at him. This needs to end. Whatever this has been, I'm handling the situation on my own from here, and I don't want you or Maisie anywhere near the fallout. Kellen was quiet for a long moment. The light moved through the oak leaves above him. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and unhurried. I know you don't mean that, he said, but I won't pull you back if you've decided to shut the door. That's not something I'm willing to do to either of us. Rhea nodded once. She turned and walked back to her villa. The gate clicked shut behind her. This time she was the one who locked it. The villa was exactly as she had left it. Cream furniture, glass walls. Afternoon light spread across white stone floors in long, clean rectangles. Every surface clear, every corner ordered, every room arranged the way Rhea had always arranged her life, with precision and without sentiment. She sat down on the floor in the middle of the living room, which was something she had never done before in this house, and stared at the ceiling for a long time. She had built her professional identity on the principle that emotion was a liability. Not because she didn't feel things, she felt them with an intensity that had always frightened her, but because she had learned early and painfully that letting those feelings direct her decisions led to loss. Her father leaving when she was 11. Her engagement ending at 29 when the man she had trusted most decided her ambition was more competitor than partner. Her mother dying with projects unfinished and a company that needed someone willing to be harder than grief. She had been hard. She had been precise. She had been by every measurable standard successful. And she had just locked the gate on the first place she had felt genuinely alive in years. She stayed on the floor until the light changed. Then she got up and went to the storage room where she had stacked the boxes she had brought from her city apartment. Things she never unpacked. Things she moved from address to address without opening. Near the bottom of the third box, wrapped in a cotton cloth, was her mother's notebook. Claire Mercer had kept handwritten records of every project she considered important. Not financial projections or technical specifications, those lived in the company systems. These were personal notes, the reasoning behind decisions, the people she had met in the communities Lumagrid was supposed to serve, the version of the company she had been trying to build before she ran out of time. Rhea sat at the kitchen table and read it from the beginning. She found the entry about the Coastal Grid Initiative 40 pages in, written in her mother's careful, slightly slanted handwriting. The numbers will always make the case for the profitable version. That's not what this is for. This is for the family in Harmon Beach that spent $340 last August keeping one window unit running because their baby couldn't tolerate the heat. This is for the community boards that have been told for 20 years that clean energy is coming and have no reason left to believe it. Don't let anyone make this into something it isn't. And don't let the company get so big that you stop hearing the people it was supposed to help. Rhea read the last two sentences again. She had been so focused on protecting the company's structure that she had stopped asking what the structure was supposed to protect. She turned to the back of the notebook where her mother had kept miscellaneous notes and contact information. On the inside back cover was a reminder about the villa's backup server installed when Claire had used the property as a remote work retreat. The server had been connected to both the villa's network and the adjacent property's irrigation system during a shared infrastructure project years ago. A legacy connection that had never been formally deactivated. Rhea went very still. Kellen's irrigation network and her villa's system were still linked. When Kellen had been checking the shared conduit on that first morning, his system had automatically logged a mirror copy of everything that had passed through the villa's router in the days prior, including every file transfer Brennan had made using Dana's credentials. The evidence had been sitting in Kellen's irrigation server the entire time. She picked up her phone. She put it down. She picked it up again. She owed him more than a phone call. She owed him an apology she didn't yet know how to give from a woman who had spent so long being right that she had nearly forgotten how to be wrong gracefully. She would figure it out. She had to. She did not wear the cream suit. Rhea stood in front of her closet for 2 full minutes, which was 2 minutes longer than she had ever spent on the question of what to wear to a professional engagement, and chose a pale blue shirt, dark trousers, and flat shoes. She pulled her hair back simply. She looked at herself in the mirror and recognized with mild alarm that she looked like a person rather than a position. She carried 2 things across the cedar fence that morning, her mother's notebook and a basket of tomatoes she had bought at the farmer's market because she had wanted to bring something and hadn't known what, and tomatoes were the only thing she could think of that belonged in this garden. Maisie answered the door. The 8-year-old looked at the basket, looked at Rhea, looked at the basket again, and delivered her verdict with the unsparing clarity that had apparently been standard in this household since birth. You bought supermarket tomatoes to apologize to someone who grows tomatoes. I'm aware, Rhea said. That's kind of a bad idea. I know. Maisie considered her for another moment, then stepped back from the door. Dad's in the greenhouse. Kellen was repotting seedlings when Rhea came in. He looked up, registered the basket, registered her expression, and set down the trowel. He didn't speak first. He had always been good at giving people the space to say what they came to say. I accused you of something you didn't do, Rhea said. I did it because I was scared, and because I have a long history of treating fear like it's the same thing as good judgment. It isn't. I'm sorry." The greenhouse was warm and quiet around them. Somewhere outside, Maisie had started singing to herself something off-key and entirely her own. Kellen looked at her for a long moment. "I'm not going to tell you it didn't hurt." "I know." He set the trowel down, slowly turning it over in his hands. He'd spent 3 days deciding whether the hurt was the whole story or just part of it. A man who fixed broken systems for a living knew the difference between a fault in the design and a fault in the moment. Rhea had bolted because she was scared, not because she was dishonest. Those were not the same thing, and he'd been around enough broken irrigation lines to know that a crack under pressure didn't mean the whole structure was unsound. "But I'm not going to hold it against you permanently," he said. "That's not how I want to live." It was, Rhea thought, a more generous response than she had earned. She set the notebook on the bench beside him and explained what she had found: the legacy server connection, the mirrored data, the file transfers logged under Dana's credentials. As she talked, Kellen's expression shifted from careful stillness to focused attention. The look he got when a system problem had a solution he could see clearly. They worked through the morning. Kellen accessed the irrigation server's backup logs and extracted the mirrored transfer data, while Rhea cross-referenced it against LumaGrid's internal records. The picture that emerged was complete and unambiguous. Brennan had used Dana's credentials to package and transfer the Coastal Grid Initiative's core assets on 4 separate occasions over 6 weeks. He had triggered the villa's remote lockout using access credentials Dana had obtained from the property management system. He had coordinated the media release with a PR contact linked to the competing firm that had received the transferred files. Every piece was documented. Every timestamp matched. By early afternoon, they had a complete evidential record compiled and encrypted on an independent drive. Rhea sat back and looked at what they had built together across the greenhouse table. 2 laptops, her mother's notebook open to the entry about Harmon Beach, a half-eaten plate of garden tomatoes. Morning light shifted to afternoon gold through the glass roof. "The board meeting is Monday," she said. "Will this be enough?" "It's more than enough." She paused. "The question is how I present it. I've spent 3 years going into that room like I'm prosecuting a case. Every time I win, I make more enemies." Kellen was quiet for a moment. "What if you went in and just told the truth? Not the version that wins, just the actual truth about what your mother built, and why it matters, and what happened to it." Rhea looked at him. "You've been fighting to protect the company," he said. "But maybe what the board needs to see isn't how hard you can fight. Maybe they need to remember what they're supposed to be protecting in the first place." Outside, Maisie had abandoned her song and was now informing someone, presumably a caterpillar, based on the one-sided nature of the conversation, that the strawberry runners were not available for eating. Rhea looked at the notebook. She looked at Kellen. "I'm going to need the rest of the afternoon," she said. "Take the greenhouse," he said. "I'll make sure Maisie doesn't reorganize your notes." It was exactly what he had said on the very first morning. Steady, unhurried, entirely reliable. As if nothing in the intervening days had changed the fundamental fact of who he was. She opened her laptop and started to write. The board meeting was on a Monday morning in late August, when the summer light came through the conference room windows at a low, golden angle that made everything look slightly more serious than usual. Rhea walked in without a presentation deck. She had the evidential file compiled and verified, which she distributed to each board member in a sealed envelope before she sat down. She gave them 2 minutes to review the cover summary. Then she spoke for 11 minutes without notes. She told them what Brennan had done, clearly, chronologically, with documentation for every claim. She told them what the Coastal Grid Initiative was, where it had come from, and what would happen to the 11 communities it was designed to serve if the asset transfer to the competing firm was allowed to complete. She told them that her mother had built LumaGrid to make things fair for people who had no other advocate, and that the company had drifted so far from that purpose that its own CFO had been able to spend 6 weeks dismantling it from the inside before anyone noticed. She did not perform outrage. She did not prosecute. She just told the truth the way Kellen had suggested, in a room full of people who had perhaps forgotten what they had originally agreed to build. When she finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. Then the board chair asked Brennan to respond to the documentation. Brennan had no response that held. By noon, he had been formally suspended, pending a full investigation. By 3 o'clock, the asset transfer had been halted, and the receiving firm had been notified that the agreement was void. By the end of the week, 2 board members who had been aligned with Brennan quietly requested a restructuring of their own governance roles, which Rhea accepted without comment. She was asked to continue as CEO. She agreed with 3 conditions: a transparency audit of all executive-level financial decisions for the prior 2 years, the establishment of an independent community advisory board with genuine voting input on the Coastal Grid Initiative, and the creation of a foundation fund to support energy access projects in underserved coastal areas. All 3 were approved. She called Kellen from the parking garage at 4:15, still in her jacket, keys in hand. "It held," she said when he answered. A pause. Then, "I know. Maisie made me check the news 3 times. Rhea laughed. It came out more easily than she expected. On the last Saturday of August, Lumagrid held its first community open day in the garden on Sunmere Lane. There was no stage, no catering company, no press release, no branded backdrop. There were long wooden tables borrowed from the neighborhood association, pitchers of cold lemonade, plates of food contributed by people who lived within 4 blocks, and 12 children from Kellen's summer gardening class transplanting seedlings into a new raised bed that would stay in the garden through autumn. Rhea spent the morning helping Maisie label plant markers in careful handwriting. She got soil on her shirt. She did not change. In the afternoon, Maisie pressed a cherry tomato into her hand and looked up at her with the direct, assessing gaze that Rhea had come to understand was simply how this child experienced the world. "Miss Rhea, are you still allergic to being taken care of?" Rhea looked at the tomato in her palm. Small, warm, grown in actual soil by an 8-year-old who had offered her a greenhouse and a handmade sign, and the uncomplicated generosity of someone who didn't yet know how rare that was. "I think I'm getting better," she said. Maisie nodded satisfied and went back to her seedlings. Kellen appeared beside Rhea a moment later. He didn't say anything. They stood together in the late summer light, watching the garden fill with people, and the quiet between them was the kind that didn't need to be filled. He had not changed her with grand gestures or dramatic declarations. He had changed her the way a garden changes in summer, gradually, steadily, through consistent warmth and the patient assumption that things left in good conditions will eventually find their way toward the light. Later, when the tables were being cleared and the last of the afternoon sun was turning the oak leaves copper, Rhea and Kellen walked to the cedar fence. Kellen unlatched the small gate that had always been there, half hidden by climbing beans, and pushed it open. Neither of them said anything about what it meant. They didn't have to. Rhea had spent years building walls precise enough to keep out anything that might hurt her. She had been very good at it, and it had cost her more than she had known how to calculate at the time. She understood now that the gate had always been there. She had just needed a summer and a garden, and a man who laughed easily and never once tried to make her feel small, to remember that she was allowed to open it. She stepped through. The sunflowers leaned toward the last of the light, unhurried and entirely certain of where they were going. Some people come into our lives not to fix us, but to remind us that we were never as broken as we believed. That warmth isn't weakness. That letting someone in doesn't mean losing yourself. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already subscribed to our channel, every week we bring you stories about real human courage, quiet love, and the moments that change everything. We'll see you in the next one.